Hey, how's it going? This is Rachel, and this is Spiritual Crypto. So, when I was around 27, I think, I was living in Manhattan at the time. So, this was like 10 years ago. I started to feel compelled to, um, I guess, just like do a bunch of spiritual seeking. And I ended up starting with like non-denominational Christian churches because that's what I grew up in and that's what I know. For anyone who's unfamiliar with what that even means, it's basically like evangelicals who aren't associated with like a larger national organization. They were like Baptists who didn't go to like the Baptist convention or whatever you would go to. So I started there because it was what was familiar and found like a weird salesy church like that on the Upper West Side and kept looking. And a friend told me about a course that was taught by a couple of monks. And one of the monks was like my age. It was like, he was 27. And the other one had been like an investment banker or something. So like, since I was also coming from the world of finance or something, I had that in common. And he was just a few years older. So they were like these sort of, like not this stereotypical monk that you would think of. And they were teaching this course, and it was on the Enneagram. And for anyone who's unfamiliar, I mentioned it in an earlier podcast episode, but it's my understanding of the Enneagram is that it's kind of like Myers-Briggs, but it adds this sort of like the second dimension to assess psychological health. So you can be different Enneagram types. I'm an Enneagram type 7, but if you're at different levels of health, you're going to look very different than you would, if you're less healthier or more or healthier. So I was really interested in the Enneagram for a while, and I think it was just because I was trying to like understand humans or something, and it goes back to feeling like an alien and also just like wanting to love people but not understanding how to how to reach people that didn't necessarily want to receive it or weren't aware enough to be on a wavelength that they were able to receive. So my friend tells me about this course taught by these monks about the Enneagram, and they were using the Enneagram as a tool for kind of like as a gateway to greater self-awareness, to then recognize that, yeah, we have these identities, these personalities, but at root, all identities are constructs. And this was just sort of a way to start better understanding self so that you could get down to the root of your being, which is something much greater than a personality type or whatever. So I go to this session, and they were talking and sharing different things. And at one point, one of the monks, the one who was slightly older, who'd been the investment banker, his name was Rasanath, and he'd grown up in India and came to the States, I think, for college and had stayed. And he said something about how he'd prayed for a friend. This was before he met Harry, the other monk he was teaching the course with, before they'd connected. He said he'd prayed for a friend, and something about the way he said it was so pure that it just made me start crying and crying. And I remember leaving this session, which was I think it was at like 20th and Broadway, if you spent time in Manhattan. And I ended up walking west, just slightly, because I walked up through the park. And then I went north, like over 50 blocks. I just kept walking, and I kept seeing strangers on the streets of Manhattan, and I was crying, and I felt so much love for every stranger that I saw. And then I started thinking about, like various people in my life that I loved, and even, like ex-boyfriends that I'd had abusive, difficult relationships with, and I felt a lot of love for them as well. And then I was I remember it was 72nd. I was walking to the train stop to finally, get on the train to go all the way home. I was living in Washington Heights at the time. I didn't want to walk, I guess, 130 blocks or 140 blocks. So I'm walking to the train stop, and at that moment, I felt that same love that I'd been experiencing for every person I was seeing and every person I was thinking of. I felt it for myself as well. And it was this profound moment because I realized that up until that point in my life, I had never felt that love for self before. And after I got home, I remember I emailed my friend who'd recommended the course, and I was telling her about the experience and also telling her that it was already starting to fade. That sort of great compassion for everyone was already, it was like dissipating. And I was sad that it was going away. And I, was talking to her about this idea of like, how do you hold on to it? How do you sustain that level of compassion? And I remember her saying that, she didn't know. So then not long after that, in another Enneagram course taught by the same monks at a different location, this was at the Bhakti Center. I'm not sure if it's still there or not, but it was at like First and First. A girl in the class, she was like in her late 20s, said something about Vipassana. And she wasn't even talking to me, and she was sitting across the room. And I was just like a bee to honey. I went up to her as soon as I could, and I asked her to spell it, and I wrote it down. And as soon as I went home, I Googled it and signed up for a course almost immediately, and was on the wait list originally, but then got into the course. So once I landed on that and had done a couple courses, it was just like my spiritual seeking had ended. I felt that I had found the thing that I've been looking for, and I felt it with this deep certainty and this sense of gratitude as well. Excuse me. And through the practice of Vipassana, I've come to understand that level of love and compassion, anyone can reach a level where it's sustainable and it's something you're experiencing at all times. Although it doesn't have to make you sob like I was crying and crying that day. But it's as you're removing these layers of trauma, these sankhara that you're carrying, as you're removing them through the process of Vipassana, you just get closer and closer to that space, because it's all of our natural state. It's what's most true for us, actually. It's just this other stuff that blocks it. That's the illusion, really. And my spiritual seeking had ended when I found Vipassana. So anyway, today, because I've had a couple other questions about my experience with Vipassana, and I wanted to try and better share about it, and also because I can't find anything like this anywhere on the internet, I thought I'd try to walk through, in the spirit of this podcast. I just want to do this from memory. I haven't taken any notes or anything. In the spirit of this just being kind of like me speaking off the cuff about whatever's coming up, and kind of trusting that what comes up is what is meant to go out or whatever. I thought I'd try to run through the 18 Vipassana courses I've done so far to share what I remembered about those experiences. And, hopefully in sharing that, maybe somebody's out there who's curious about it, will maybe feel compelled to check it out, and we'll have a good experience, which is, I shouldn't say good experience, because the whole point is that you eventually get to a stage at which everything is good all the time, regardless of what is happening. And I'm clearly far away from that stage. I'm still mad about a lot of stuff, and I still struggle with Earth, with what it's like being a human on Earth, which I later came to learn is also actually a stage. There's this pamphlet that I found, maybe 14 Vipassana courses in or something. I'd never seen it before in any other course. And it described these sort of like 10 stages you go through as you're developing spiritually through the practice. And a stage is actually like hating Earth, like being disgusted by Earth. And then another stage is wanting to get out of here as soon as possible. So I think I'm in that range of stages at the moment, but hopefully I'll come out of it soon. I feel myself starting to accept the reality of Earth more and more. So I think that sankhara is starting to clear. But here we go. So my first Vipassana course, I should at least track what number I'm talking about, because 18, I could lose count. So the first course was the one I got into off the wait list that I mentioned after that girl in the Enneagram class had just literally said the word Vipassana. So I got into the center in Massachusetts. That's the closest one to New York City. And I went there. It's in Shelburne Falls, which is where Amherst is, I think. I'm not certain that Amherst is in the same town, but it's very close to Amherst. And so I went there, and at that time, I was so consumptive. Like, for anyone familiar with the Enneagram, it was like unhealthy Enneagram type 7 behavior, where I was always traveling and running around, or mostly drinking alcohol. That was always my drug of choice, but like consuming different substances. I was just consuming all the time, and I wasn't conscious of it during that period of my life. I thought I would quote unquote get bored. I've talked about this some in a previous episode. But really what I've come to understand for me was that the quote unquote boredom was just this layer sitting on top of the anxiety, so that when I would touch on the boredom, it would trigger some sort of activity to keep me from actually sitting with the anxiety and the pain in that, so that I could actually, like finally release it and heal it for good. So now I don't believe in boredom, and I'm never bored anymore. I haven't been bored in years, and I'm kind of, I just don't think it exists as a thing. I think it's just something that comes up when people feel discomfort and they try to find something, some form of entertainment or some form of distraction to take them away from that, from experiencing and dealing with that discomfort. But at that time, I didn't know any of that. I hadn't come to this belief that I have now. And consciously, I thought that the Vipassana course was just going to be this new novel experience that I'd never done before, that sounded hard and sounded interesting. And you go, and it's a 10-day course, and you're silent for 9.5 days for the most part, although you can ask the teacher questions if you need to. And there's what they call a manager there who can take care of any material needs you may have. Like if you forgot your toothbrush or whatever, they'll help you with those sorts of things. But beyond that, the idea is to treat it as though you're alone, so that you're just, like with yourself, because you can go deeper and clear out more of your trauma in that sort of environment. So I'm at this first course, and my biggest memory of the course is that I had a ton of rage coming up. And I remember, I don't know if it was like into the course, maybe day 6-ish, day 7, something like that. I had the realization that my father didn't love me. And I still believe that. I mean, I feel like now I have a much better understanding of what actual, true, unconditional love is, and that wasn't something I received from him. So that was a big revelation, because a lot of the rage that was coming up was about stuff that he had done to me, different abusive treatment over many years, and also stuff about old boyfriends who, I was attracted to and dated, because being with them and being mistreated in the ways that they mistreated me was similar to the experience I had in my family of origin. And so now I understand, that thing that, even though I didn't like that, I was very conscious, even as I was going through those abusive relationships, that I didn't want to be in an abusive relationship. It was just that it was familiar. It's just what I knew. It's the only thing I knew. I didn't know what like a loving relationship felt like from anyone, let alone like in a romantic type of relationship framework. And and that's how it is for us, right? Like the law of attraction takes us to what's familiar, and like attracts like. And I had some belief system that, for a long time led me into those types of situations because I believed that I deserved them. And through Vipassana, I've been healing a lot of that. So it was a lot of rage coming up. And then the trippiest thing about that first course was that a repressed memory, for like 11 years, I think, of being raped as a teenager, and also in my early 20s, but it was weird. It's still, part of it still hasn't come back yet. I know it happened because I then went back and found emails I had sent at that time about it. But I don't remember the specifics of the events. So there's more in this repressed memory that I guess is maybe even more traumatic, or else my psyche wouldn't have split it off in this way. But I healed enough through that first course that I was able to reintegrate a big chunk of what I'd split off. And I remember that the rapes had happened. And so coming from there was I was able to move forward and start to truly heal the fact that I've been raped. So that was the first course. And I turned 28 while I was there. Is that right? 29. I turned 29 while I was there. I did it over my 29th birthday, which is April 2nd. That was April 2nd, 2013 then. And I then came out of the course, and I meditated for one day, and then I couldn't do Vipassana. Physically, when I tried, I wasn't able to do it for 2 years. And I understand in hindsight that it's because my, what's called Shila, S-I-L-E, my morality, specifically the fact that I was drunk all the fucking time, was making it impossible to sit for meditation. And it's such a real thing. I mean, when your Shila is solid, part of the reason that the courses are silent is because they don't want you to inadvertently tell a lie to somebody. When you're making small talk or whatever, as people do, people lie all the time. I think I'd read in the Times or something that like the average person lies 10 times a day or something insane like that. So yeah, part of the reason, which I think makes for brilliant design, is that the courses are silent so that that's not possible to do while you're there. And when your Shila isn't solid, when you are in the habit of, when you're drunk all the time like I was or whatever it is, it's like 5 things. And I remember I couldn't remember the fifth. I couldn't recall the 5th thing when I was trying to list them in a previous podcast episode. But the point is that for me, it was because I was drunk a lot, and so I couldn't meditate. And so I did meditate for 2 years. And then, and I did other stuff. I was still kind of looking around. I went to another meditation center where they said it was like a silent 6-day course, but they charged you money for it. And people like had their phones and were talking. And I was just like, no, like I want to be able to be in a framework where I can actually go deep like I could at the Vipassana course I'd been to. And the other brilliant thing about them is that they're free. Like they're entirely donation funded, although some of the organizations will get loans from places that give loans to nonprofits and stuff. If they have like a big like center expansion that they're working on or whatever. Yeah, but that was the first course. So I did some other stuff. Over my 30th birthday, I went to a friend's wedding. So I didn't go to a course. And then, come 2015, 2 years later, I'm 31-ish now. I did this over my 31st birthday. I just was aware that I was so agitated, and I thought that I really should go back to a course. So I did my second course in Texas. There's a center in Kaufman, Texas. They're usually in small towns that are a couple hours outside of a major city, so it can be kind of like a quiet setting. And the centers are often homes that have been donated by meditators, which was the case, I think, in Kaufman. It just seemed like it had been somebody's house, and then they built the Dhamma hall, the meditation hall, on the land that had been donated. Although I'm not sure, like I've never asked if it had for sure been donated or who had donated it or anything like that. I know that center opened in I think 1991. So I'm at that center, and I remember being super agitated going in. I took like a shuttle from the airport, and I was just so just frustrated with everything. I remember trying to put the fucking fitted sheet on my bed. Or it was like a mattress cover or something. I just saw an Onion headline today. I was looking at Onion headlines because I was talking about the Onion with a friend. And there was like an Onion headline that was the joke that it was like 85% of suicides committed when people try to put on fitted sheet. I'm like fucking up the delivery, but because the headline would be shorter. But yeah, it was something like that. I was trying to put on something that would fit tight to the mattress, and I remember just being so angry and frustrated and whatever at the very beginning of the course. And beyond that, I don't remember a specific trauma surfacing, or I know I was talking to the guy I was dating as I was going in, and I had a dream about him the first night where he was at the center, and that was very real. A lot of times your dreams are much, much more vivid when you're at a Vipassana course, and I found that it's just they're longer. I'm sure, it's just because I'm remembering more of them, but some people have crazy dreams, and some people have nightmares as fear sankhara, fear traumas coming on the surface. Although I've never really experienced that and don't really have nightmares very often at all. But yeah, I remember talking to him, and then afterward he had texted and I was going to go see him, and it was just I was questioning that relationship. I remember in the car ride to the airport that I got with another meditator. Before that, I remember sitting at the very end of the course and just feeling so peaceful and happy, and just knowing that I would be supported, which was a big thing and continues to be a big thing for me. I haven't healed it yet. I knew that I'd be able to get a ride to the airport and it would be fine. And this awesome woman, Aiko, gave me a ride, and she was really fun. And I was talking to her in the car about like, do you think I should break up with this guy and whatever. And she was telling me about her ex-partner that she was like seeing again, and she was just really fun. And yeah, beyond that, I know I cleared things at that course for sure. I remember that particular guy that I was dating commenting later about how I didn't drink as much, like anywhere near as much after that course. So I think the drinking sankara really started to clear up after that specific course. But I don't remember like a theme in the way that I know that I had a lot of rage coming up in the first course, anything like that. Yeah, and then the other trippy thing was that back then I was on Facebook, and Aiko and I became Facebook friends. And I saw like a year or two later, she'd posted that she'd gone to another 10-day Vipassana course. And on the 6th day, she had to be sent home because her head was really hurting. And it seemed like this medical necessity to go. She deliberated it and talked it over with the teacher. And it turned out she had a brain tumor. And it was like she became aware of it while at the course. And it made me wonder afterward, like if she hadn't been, like through Vipassana, you're bringing a lot of awareness to your body sensations. And you're working to be equanimous about those sensations. And yeah, it just made me wonder, like, if she hadn't been in an environment where she was really paying close attention to her body in that way, if she wouldn't have necessarily gone to the doctor as soon, and if the brain tumor wouldn't have been detected quite so soon. And she had it, it was removed, and she's healthy. And I actually ran into her again at a course I did just like a few months ago, also in Texas. So that was really cool to see her and kind of see how things had come along for her, and how she developed in her practice. And yeah, it was cool. So that was my second course. So after that, I started doing them every year over my birthday up until COVID. So the third course I did then was over my 32nd birthday. And I did this one in Onalaska, Washington. So it's kind of sort of in between Portland and Seattle. And at that course, I remember I shared a room, that was the first time I'd had to share a room with somebody. At the bigger centers, you don't have to do that. I remember toward the end feeling like I wished it were longer. I wished it was like a 13-day course or something, because I felt like I was kind of in the middle of something big coming up that hadn't yet released. And I didn't have enough time for it to release, because I had to leave you leave very early in the morning of day 11. And I think it was more sort of like sadness that was surfacing. So there was sort of more of this emotional theme, more grief was kind of coming on the surface. And there was that. And I remember my ego-y thing afterward where I was talking to somebody who was volunteering, who was a server at that center at that time. And her sister had sat the course with me and had been my roommate. And her sister was like, yeah, Rachel's, she sat at 3 different centers now or something. And like, I remember this sort of like ego-y thing I had in association with that, this idea of thinking it was cool that I'd like been to a bunch of different places or something. And there's still a little bit of that there. And I'm not sure what that's about exactly. It probably has to do with, because there's like some anger and frustration there about like my mother, for instance, didn't really, like, she lives not far from where she grew up. Like most people in the world, most people don't live more than 50 miles away from where they were born, as I understand. But yeah, that's probably a little bit of what's related to that, because I felt like I was negatively impacted by the fact that my mom didn't explore the world more. And it's interesting that I kind of hold her more responsible for that than I do my dad. It's probably misogynistic a bit on my part too. Yeah, but that was in there. The fourth course. Okay, so what are we getting up to now? The fourth course, 2013, was in 2017. So I turned 33 that year. Where did I go? It was a different center. 2017. It was in Kelseyville in Northern California, north of the Bay Area. And it's like this little woodsy setting. It's a small center. And I had an amazing course. It was such a wonderful course. I always would get a ride, as much as I could anyway. Usually you can get a ride through the ride board. And I always find that to be fun. It's fun to like be in the car talking to other meditators for a couple hours. And I got a ride with this person who was a startup founder. And I remember talking to him and finding him kind of arrogant. And he was like connected to cryptocurrency. I remember he corrected me because I was saying Ethereum, and he's like, I think the cryptocurrency is called Ether. And he was right, but I didn't know that at the time. Yeah, but at the center itself, it was just like, I like the woods. There's just like a lot of, I guess they're pine trees. Someone recently told me that they're pine trees. And yeah, I just felt so good at the end. And I remember I volunteered to ring the bell in the morning at this course. They ask old students if anyone wants to volunteer to ring the gong at 4 a.m. and 4:20 a.m. to wake up meditators because the servers are still sleeping at that time. And I volunteered to do it because I wanted, in large part because I wanted to help myself, because I had so much trouble getting up for that early sit. Before, at previous courses, I would just be so tired. So I figured, like, if I do this, it'll get me up, and then maybe, like, I'll be likelier to meditate more. So I did that. And I remember at the end of the course, people were so, I mean, it was the energy I was in, I think, because I felt so good and I cleared so much. Several people came up and thanked me for doing this task. And I've done that task at a bunch of courses since, and I've never had, I don't think anyone else thanked me. A server thanked me one time at another course. But yeah, I was just like, I just felt so good. And I remember I was in the second row. They don't tell you this, but the people in the first row are the most advanced meditators, at least on paper. And the person in the seat closest to the other gender, where the other gender sits, that's the person in the first seat. So that person's supposed to be like the most advanced meditator in the hall on paper. And so I was in the second row, as I said, and several of the people in the first row were in like chairs on the ground or whatever, backjacks and stuff. They had backjacks. And that shit, like, that messes you up. So if you're considering going, and I mean, you can always get a chair or a backjack if you really feel you need it. But I try to encourage people not to do that, because so much can come out of your back and so much trauma that you're holding can be released, much more, I think, when you choose not to go with a chair or a backjack. And it's interesting because I feel like you can really see it in people that are sitting in those chairs. Even if they're in the front row, you'll be able to tell that they're like not quite as far along. I feel like I can tell that now. But there was this girl, she was Japanese, who was in the front row, kind of like catty corner to me. And I was so impressed, I remember, because she just sat on the cushion with like what was provided with a single blanket. And, like, you wouldn't know this yet if you haven't gone, but when people are starting out, you'll have so many cushions and so many aches and pains will be coming on the surface as you're releasing trauma. It's amazing how physicalized and externalized the trauma becomes as it's surfacing. So you'll have these aches and pains, and before you understand it, you'll be like, why is my leg hurting? Like, I've never hurt my leg before, to my knowledge. And then suddenly it'll release at a certain point as that sankara leaves your body, as that trauma leaves your body, and it's like trippy as fuck. And so I really want more people to know about it as a thing. And yeah, so I mean, I was just like, wow, this girl doesn't need all of these cushions. Like, she's so far along or whatever. And she was also in my little cabin. I shared a cabin. We each had our own room, but we shared a bathroom. And I think there were like 5 of us in this little cabin. And yeah, I was just so like inspired, and I felt so supported by how strong she was in her meditation. And then at the end of the course, she came up to me and she said something like she was like, everybody is wonderful, but like your face in the meditation, in the kitchen, in the dining hall, she was like, your face was just shining. And I wanted to tell you that I saw it, like, and she said something about how she could feel that she was in a really supportive environment, and it had to do with me. It had to do with what she was feeling from me in the same way I'd felt that from her. And I was so flattered because I thought she was like the most advanced meditator there, and she'd like observed this thing about me, and it was really cool. And I met some really cool people at that course. I remember sitting at the end and feeling like, oh, these are because a lot of times you'll kind of feel drawn to certain people. And it's interesting because we're so rarely in environments where we're around people that we cannot speak to, So like, there are a few people that I was drawn to that I hadn't one of them I'd spoken to before the course started, but I remember at the end kind of sitting around with all of them and thinking it was cool that we kind of found each other. and how it was kind of interesting because I felt drawn to them during the course before we'd spoken or before we'd had, like longer conversations because I had spoken to that one person. I don't remember specific Sankara coming up during that course. I do remember kind of a scary experience, I thought, in that I was in the cabin one night and I felt like something was out in the woods. And then I felt like, as I recall, I had a sense like something was out there. And then I thought I heard the door to the cabin open not long after. But I had a separate door to my room, which was locked. And I later served at that center. And at one point I had to enter a room to help a student. And it was the same room that I had been in at this course. And I wondered if there was some kind of energetic pull to that room that drew me there that was related to whatever that weird, scary experience had been. But I felt, to date, I think that's the course where I felt just like ebullient at the end, like more so than any other course, because different stuff is coming up all the time. And part of the more meta idea of it is that you learn to be equanimous about even that as well. You learn to be equanimous about when you feel good and when you don't feel as good. It's just because all of it's going to change sooner or later. 5th course, 2018. Okay, so how old am I then? I turned 34 that year. So, okay, that was just in Kelseyville. 2018, I think I did 3 courses. Is that right? Man, I probably should have taken some notes coming into this. I turned 34. Where was I living? I still had a place. Oh, I didn't have a place in New York anymore because I gave up my place in New York in 2017, I believe. Yeah, I'm wrong. I think I did 3 courses in 2017, and that seems right. So my bad. So the 5th course was not in 2018. It was in the middle. It was like in July of 2017. That's right. Yeah. Okay. So I forgot this until now. But interestingly, it's like when you're ready for something, when you're ready to progress to a certain stage, it reveals itself. And so I hadn't known that there was a more advanced course called a Satipatthana Sutta that I could do until I volunteered with a couple, like I did a Vipassana volunteer day where we were scouting for land because they wanted to open a new center in the Bay Area, which is now happening. They got the land and that it'll be around, in the next couple years, as I understand. So some of the meditators I hung out with that day told me that I could do a Satipatthana Sutta, and I hadn't known that was an option. And I even asked about it in my 4th course. I asked the teacher what else I could do to develop in my meditative practice, and she, I guess, forgot to mention that Satipatthanas were a thing. This is a teacher I've interacted with since who kind of had a flaky Sankara, which I'm sure just was something I ran into because I was flaky as fuck for a bunch of years. And gradually work that out through Vipassana as well. But there's still a twinge of it. It's not quite all the way gone. So, so I was like, okay, cool. I could do this more advanced course. That's dope. They're shorter. They're only 8 days long. And you have a text. You have the actual Satipatthana Sutta text with you, and you can read it, and you can take notes. And the discourses are different. The teacher is going through the Satipatthana Sutta and explaining it. So I did that in July of 2017, and I did this at North Fork Center, and also this is a different center as well. It's pretty close to Yosemite, and it's a bigger center. They have a pagoda there, so you can you have your own meditation cell. And I remember at this course, I was reading the Satipatthana Sutta, and there was a footnote, and it was talking about the jhanas, which are different stages that folks go through as well. And it said something about being able to recall more about past lives because of how far you've developed in terms of the jhanas. And I was like, oh, interesting. I bet that's why I've been able to start to develop this weird skill. I'd been doing one-on-one sessions with this woman, Taya Anderson, who's really, really talented. And we've been looking at past life stuff, and to my great surprise, I was discovering that I I didn't have to be hypnotized or put in a trance or whatever practitioners might do to help people remember past life stuff. I could just recall it, and we could have these conversations where we were sharing information. And I always record sessions with Taya, and often I would re-listen to them afterward and meditate or something. And sometimes I'd notice that she caught something about a past life that I didn't catch until later, but also agreed with. Like in one session, she didn't explicitly say this, but we were looking at this past life where I was like a painter in, I want to say Croatia, some place like that. And another person I'd worked with who was a practitioner also pointed out this life. Interestingly, it's like they're close to the surface. It's particularly close to the surface. But, and the partner I think I'm going to meet in this lifetime was in this life, and he died. I think he's died in a couple lives, and that was hard for me. Anyway, when we were first looking at this particular lifetime, which was also in 2017, I didn't get it when I was doing the session with her live, but when I was listening to the recording afterward, I realized that she was picking up on the notion that I was gay, that I was a gay man in that life. And I said it to her in the next session, and we talked about it, and she had been thinking that and getting at it, but she didn't explicitly say it. And so it was just kind of interesting she caught it before I did. And then it was also interesting that we both like landed on that conclusion and stuff. But yeah, I was just like reading the Satipatthana Sutta at this Vipassana course. It was just like, oh, I wonder if I've just done enough of Anapana meditation, concentration-based meditation at this point that now my past life recall has just gotten better. I don't know. But some trippy skills that I didn't even know were skills have started to show themselves more as I've developed in Vipassana. I remember not getting the Satipatthana Sutta. I really didn't get it. I just felt like the course was too short. I wished it was longer. I remember being annoyed because when I got there were like two women who were particularly agitated. And I just had this aversion to them. And so then, of course, I was like close to them during the course. Like one of them was in my little cabin. And then another one I had to ride back to San Francisco, to the San Francisco area with in the car for hours. And then, interestingly to me, that same woman ended up being at the 20-day that I just sat earlier this year, like in 2 months ago. That's not right. In August, I guess. What is that? 3-ish months ago. I sat my first 20-day, and she was at that course, and I saw how far along she'd come, which then made me reflect on how far I've come and how many times, I must have been the person that was like frustrating everybody else. And just to have more empathy for that and work on releasing that frustration and understand, she'd changed so much, and all of us are changing all the time. We're all here to continue to develop. We're not done unless maybe there are some, liberated people living as humans right now who are totally free of all of this stuff. But most of us still have some stuff to work out. So anyway, these two particular women I thought were really agitated when I saw them at the beginning of this course, and I didn't want to be near them during the session. During, for the duration of the course. And of course I was. And I also remember noticing how the woman in my cabin, who was pregnant, she was 6 months pregnant. I think there were 2 pregnant women in my 5-person cabin. I remember one of them talking about how it's good to sit a course when you're 6 months pregnant or so. And I remember noticing how much better, quote unquote, she was by the end of the course. She was so much less agitated by the end of the course. Yeah, so that was probably the big theme of this course for me, my 5th course, which was just this idea that they're so agitated, and it was supposed to be a more advanced course, and why isn't everybody more advanced and whatever. And I remember making a comment about that as I was heading out to the car to get a ride back to San Francisco with this nice, really cool woman. Her name was Lucretia, who was giving me a ride. I drove, actually. She had a rental car and I drove. And I just said something about did you think everybody was surprisingly agitated? And I was just like, I thought everybody would be more advanced because it's a more advanced course and whatever. And Lucretia was like, well, the agitation comes from inside of you. And I didn't get it. Like, that's the big intellectual and ultimately experiential learning through Vipassana that you reach, that everything that's causing your unhappiness comes from inside of you. It doesn't make something that somebody does morally right or whatever, something that harms you, but you just reach a point where you're not affected. More and less things negatively impact you, and it's just because of this change inside of you. And I really didn't get it, and I still didn't get it even after she said it then. I wasn't even getting it intellectually, and like was far away from getting it experientially. But that's a big part of that sankhara, like that's still kind of coming loose for me and kind of, like dislodging. But yeah, I remember she said that, and I disagreed with her in the moment. It was only when I thought about it later that I reflected on how obvious and how right she is, and how interesting it was that I wasn't getting that, and I was so averse to that idea. Yeah, so that was the big theme there. And I just didn't understand the Satipatthana at all. It wasn't until I did my second Satipatthana a couple years later that it just really clicked, and I was like, holy fuck, this is like the key to everything. And it was so interesting that I didn't get it in that first session. And then I really, really got it in the second session, and it just was amazing and blew my mind. But this is already kind of long, and I've only talked about 5 courses. So yeah, I guess I'll make this a little mini series. I'll stop this here. That was my first 5 Vipassana courses. I will make other episodes to get through the total 18 courses I've done to date. But thank you for listening. I should say every episode that, for those who don't know, I founded a social good cryptocurrency called Seeds. It's basically like cryptocurrency mutual aid. We bring a lot of the tenets I've come to learn through Vipassana meditation, and also through how fucking well run the courses are, into what we're doing through Seeds. So if you're interested, you can check it out at seedsgives.com, seedsgives.com. And yeah, if you need help, you're welcome to ask for help there. And if you'd like to help others, you can do that as well. And we'll send you Seeds cryptocurrency in thanks.